So today, I'd like to talk to you about this. This is currently in a public preview, and the feature is currently available for all customers to use. All MD Plan 2 customers can use this feature, and we'd love for you to try it out and give us your feedback. So the Software Usage Insights feature allows organizations to view software usage within their organization, including devices using this software, devices using vulnerable versions of the software, which is listed as exposed devices. And we calculate this data by regularly collecting create process events and snapshots of the process list from each of the devices in your organization, which you can then use this data to make informed decisions about which applications you want to block or which applications you want to restrict usage of within your organization. And that can either be done through Microsoft Defender Vulnerability Management Application Block, which we'll discuss in the second part of this presentation, or it can also be done through other means such as Windows Defender Application Control policies through MEM. The insights provided represent a picture of the last 30 days of usage in the organization and can be investigated on a per device level and even on per version level in the software inventory. So there are a couple prerequisites. The main one is that Microsoft Defender antivirus must be running in either passive or active mode for us to be able to collect this information. And furthermore, customers need to have access to the vulnerability management section of the Microsoft 365 Defender portal. So once all those prerequisites are met, customers have waited for some data to be collected, you can head over to the software page and select any supported Windows application to view the median usage of the application as well as the number of devices using that software in the organization. This will be listed in the side pane anytime that you click on one of the supported applications in the software inventory, and will show just below the additional details. By drilling into a specific application, customers can determine how many devices are using this software actively, as well as how many devices are using vulnerable versions of the software, which shows as exposed devices. And this usage is shown in graph format over the past 30 days in the software usage or in the software page section. Additionally, by going to the Installed Devices tab, deeper into the software page view, you'll be able to see software usage on a per device basis, which can help you determine what the impact would be if you were to block this application, either via MDVM app block or even via other app control solutions you might have, such as Defender Application Control. You can also see current version, which is listed in the version distribution or listed in the installed versions column there. And then additionally, you could go over to the version distribution tab just to the right of this one to see usage for specific versions as well. So I'll just play a short video just kind of showing me interacting with this feature in particular. So we go down to the software inventory section. Here we will filter to Windows software only. Looking at these, we can see a number of Windows applications installed within our tenant. Here we can see the software usage over the past 30 days. So you can see that 13 out of 461 devices in the org are using this software, and the median usage is 4 days for this particular application, which is Google Chrome. Additionally, we'll go up to the Open This Software page. We'll head over to the to view this graph here. And here again, you can see that we have devices without known exposure using this software listed on a timed graph basis. And then we also have listing for the exposed devices over time that may be using vulnerable versions of this software. And heading up to the Installed Devices tab, we can view all of the different devices listed within the organization, and we can sort by software usage to get an understanding of which devices are using this software the most. And these may be ones that you want to target for blocking vulnerable versions in the case that they're using a particularly vulnerable version of the software. Heading over to security recommendations, which is where you'll view different things in particular for blocking applications. This is where you'll see update security recommendations. This will be for the Windows platform. After clicking on that, you'll also be able to see the software usage listed here, which can help you make a better decision in terms of what you should do for blocking moving forward, or whether to warn folks against using those particular versions of software. So in terms of limitations, software usage, as I mentioned, is based on the past 30 days of data. So anything throughout the past 30 days will be calculated and will provide a median usage calculation for that particular piece of software. And usage insights are currently limited to supported Windows applications. So we currently don't have a full list of those applications, but we can provide some more guidance in our documentation. So in terms of feedback and next steps, that's essentially what I wanted to cover for software usage insights. So it's currently in public preview. There's a couple different links here which we can share on the webinar page as well. But in terms of the blog post, that's in our Microsoft Tech community space, so you can see some more information there. As well as the docs link, which covers all of the information that we just discussed and is listed under software usage insights in the Defender vulnerability management docs on docs.microsoft.com. So I'll pause for a moment. I don't know if there's any questions in particular that we wanted to cover here. I think we saw a public list available for supported applications. So yeah, thanks, Trishun, for covering that one. Folks can see the answer to that in the published section. So next up, we're going to cover MDVM application block. So in terms of application block, this is another public preview feature, and block vulnerable applications essentially helps organizations ensure that they're not running vulnerable versions of software on their devices. So this one ties in really nicely with the software usage insights feature, because you can get an understanding first of what how much usage those applications are getting before you make the decision to go ahead and block or warn against usage of those applications. So in terms of overview, MDVM block vulnerable application provides customers with the capability of pinpointing vulnerable versions of applications running in their organization, and then blocking or warning users against the execution of these application versions. In order to ensure a smooth experience for the end user, we've added the ability to specify a custom end user message and a support link, which can help to ensure that end users are clear on what steps they can take to resolve the issue, whether it be using another application or updating to a newer version of this application. Security recommendations for vulnerable applications make it easy for your organization to determine which applications to block, and the remediation section in the vulnerability management portal tracks blocked applications, including which of those versions are blocked and on which devices. So when a block occurs on the endpoint, Advanced Hunting will also populate with these block events, so you can track end user activity and review effectiveness of the policy that you put in place. In terms of prerequisites, this feature is part of the Microsoft Defender Vulnerability Management add-on, which you can also get as a standalone license. But if you're a Microsoft Defender for Endpoint Plan 2 customer, the Microsoft Defender Vulnerability Management add-on may be your best option there. Free trials are available for both of these, and you can find those in our documentation. In terms of permissions, if you're using role-based access control in your organization, you need the threat and vulnerability management application handling permission, which essentially supplies the user with the ability to apply immediate mitigation actions and manage blocked apps list, including the ability to unblock applications in the case that you no longer want to block that particular version. If you're not using role-based access control, then the user will require AAD security admin or global admin role. We also have some minimum anti-malware client and engine versions, which are listed here and in our documentation as well. And this enforcement is supported on devices Windows 10 or higher, and that we've backported the endpoint and end user experience to older versions of Windows, RS5 and beyond. So for getting started, you'll head over to the Defender Security Center or the Microsoft 365 Defender portal and go to Settings, Advanced Features, and make sure that Allow or Block File is enabled. This is required to ensure that file indicators are working within the organization, which is what the MDVM application block feature relies on. Devices must be onboarded to NDE, and they must be in order to make sure they're populating the software inventory. Security recommendations will also populate based on software versions that are running. Also, I mentioned onboarded to NDE, but you can also have the MDVM standalone experience as well. After security recommendations populate, you want to create a MDVM block policy using the steps outlined that I'll outline in the following slides. So to identify vulnerable applications, you'll be going to the security recommendations section. This is the same section we discussed in the previous one with software usage insights. So you can see the software usage listed here as well as part of the recommendation. So in this particular recommendation, we see that Chrome has 22 known vulnerabilities associated with the versions that are running within our organization, and that there are 11 exposed devices using this software. But we can see that, there are 11 devices that have this software installed, but they're not currently using it. So the median usage here is 0 days. You may still want to block this application to ensure that usage happens in the future. So to do that, you would hit request remediation right here. You'd head over to the device scope. So here you can choose to apply this to all device groups, or you can apply to specific device groups. And this will depend on how you've configured the MD environment. This would be MD device groups is the current supported method of scoping these policies. So you want to ensure that you have device groups created in MD. Heading to the next step, we see the remediation request. So here you can set the remediation option as software update. And there is an option here to essentially open a ticket in Microsoft Endpoint Manager, which will create a security task so that IT managers can IT admins can take steps to mitigate this as well. You can set a remediation due date for that security task, and then also a priority. And then here is where the bulk of the application block feature happens. So here we have multiple options listed for mitigation actions. One option is to do nothing, which is not recommended. The next couple options are really what we're talking about today, which is the block and warn capabilities. So if you do choose to warn against vulnerable versions of Google Chrome, for example, running in your organization, essentially what will happen is when they initially run this application, they'll be blocked, but they'll have the ability to bypass the block and run the software after reviewing the risks there. Block is the final action, and this is the type of policy that will not allow any vulnerable versions of this application to run with no ability to bypass. So in this case, we might choose block, and here you can see is where you also specify customize end user message or end user support link, which will get embedded in the notification. And all you have to do is click and it'll open the primary or the preferred browser window with that link. So clicking to the next step, we'll review and finish. So we're creating a policy. We're applying it to a couple of different device groups. It's a block policy for Google Chrome, and we can see the message that users will see. To view this, that this blocked application has been put in place, we can go over to the remediation section, and here you'll see blocked applications. Here is the Chrome listing. So you can see that we have a policy of block on, we have a couple of different policies. One of those, the block policy that we just created, and we can see the blocked versions here are listed. There's some additional ones that you click show more. And then you also see the device groups of those that policy is going to apply to. Another thing I also want to call out is I mentioned that MDVM app block relies on file indicators from MD. So in order to see the indicators, the actual file hashes that you've created indicators for to block each of these versions, you can head over to this link here and click view details of blocked versions in the indicator page. And that will show you all of the different file hashes that were created as a result of this policy. So this is a short video just kind of going through what I just discussed to show how easy it is. So you'll first head over to recommendations. We see an option to update Google Chrome. We'll go ahead and click that. We can see software usage in this particular tenant, it's a test tenant, so the software usage is relatively low. Heading over to the request remediation pane here, you can see that we have an option to apply it to all device groups or selected device groups. We'll choose all device groups for now. Software update. You can also open a ticket in MEM, as I mentioned, for the security tasks. Set the remediation due date. Priority, if we hit next, we can choose to block this application. And here is where we'll actually just specify a different message. So we'll say, please update to a newer version of Google Chrome. We'll keep that length the same, and then we'll move to next, and we'll see that we can submit, review, and finish creating this policy. Once we hit done, we head over to the remediation section, the blocked application section, and then we see here that the Google Chrome has been added. The Google Chrome block has been added to our list of blocked applications, and these are the two versions in particular that we're blocking throughout the organization. You can also open the software page to view more information about this application. So heading over to the end user experience of what this would look like. So within a particular virtual machine that I'm just testing here, we can see that Google Chrome was blocked from running, and we see the accompanying toast notification. And we can also see that the customized message shows up in the toast notification. If you did specify a custom link, you would just click on this notification at any part of the body, and that would trigger the preferred browser window to view that custom link. We'll go ahead and dismiss that. I also wanted to showcase a warn application, a warn policy for blocking an application. So in this case, we see a warn for WinZip. We go ahead and allow that. And then the second time we try to run that application, we'll see that it does successfully run. So I mentioned advanced hunting is also supported for Microsoft Defender application block. We'll be adding some queries to our documentation in the coming days to start use as a starting point. But essentially, you want to ensure that you're looking for device events or device file events, etc., that have the Win32/TVM as the enterprise block type. For known issues and limitations, MDVM app block is currently limited to supported Windows applications. We have some more guidance in our documentation, but Microsoft applications are not supported. Recommendations relating to operating systems are not supported, and then apps where we do not have sufficient information about the particular file or high enough confidence to block those applications accurately, we also won't have the ability to block some of those. All vulnerable application versions are blocked. So when you create that block, you currently don't have the option to select particular versions. Any vulnerable version that's running in your organization will be blocked when you create the app block policy. Typically, file blocks are enforced within a few minutes, but as with all of our file indicators, this can take up to 30 minutes. So if you're testing it out for the first time, maybe wait up to 30 minutes for the first policy to come into place. Also, I mentioned that you can go and view the particular file IOCs that are created when you create a TVM app block policy. In particular, the particular thing I want to call out here is that some applications may create several file IOCs, and you have a limit of 15,000 indicators per tenant. So if you're approaching that limit, make sure that you are keeping an eye on that. So in terms of feedback and next steps, if you're using MDVM app block today, would love to hear your feedback. Otherwise, you can head over to our documentation, which is in the Microsoft Defender Vulnerability Management Docs Hub under Block Vulnerable Applications, and you can view that documentation on how to get started, and then again, provide your feedback to the alias listed on the slide here. That's everything for me. So I think we'll go ahead and maybe answer a few questions if there's any additional ones.
I think we have one right now that's being responded to, but is there a way to create global policy for a group of software applications instead of each individual application as part of remediation? If you want to speak to that, Thomas.
Sorry, I cut out for a sec there. Could you repeat that one?
Oh, sure. Is there a way to create global policy for a group of software applications instead of each individual application as part of remediation?
Got you. Okay. Currently, we only support creating these policies on a per application basis. So in terms of creating policies for a group of applications or categories of applications, that's not something we support yet. And I think Elena is also replying to this post as well. There was also one in the news section that we can answer, which is for warning, what's the time window until the next toast notification comes again? Elena, did you want to help to answer that one? This is the time to time between warn policies.
Yeah. So I will also answer the questions, but currently the time is going to be between 1 day to a couple of days. It's non-deterministic at this point. We are trying to make it actually configurable. So that will be the next thing that we have on our radar.
Thank you. Don't know if I see any additional ones. Thanks, folks, for helping to answer questions. This is great. And we'll keep an eye on the questions list as well. If folks have additional questions on either software usage insights or app block, we're happy to answer those. So I guess, Jacqueline, we could probably switch over to, actually, sorry, there's one more question. Can you create a block warn policy for a specific version or set of versions instead of all vulnerable applications in the environment? No, so today, as mentioned in the known issues and limitations, when you do create a block for example, Google Chrome, any vulnerable version of Google Chrome that's running in the org, particularly for the devices that you're scoping the policy to, will be blocked. So if you apply a policy to all devices, we'll look at all of the versions running on all of those devices, and for any version that is vulnerable, that will be included in the block policy. But that's something that we're thinking about in the future, as well as specific versions. Alrighty. I guess we'll switch over to Michael now.
Yes,
who will be chatting about firmware assessments. Awesome.
Sounds great. Thank you so much. Michael, please introduce yourself.
Yeah, thank you. I'm Michael Kapelevich. I'm product manager for the MDVM. Sharing just a sec. Okay. So in this presentation, I will cover the new feature that we have introduced into public preview. It's a hardware and firmware vulnerability assessment. I will describe the problems that we try to address and some of the upcoming features, and then there will be a walkthrough, some screenshots to showcase the functionality. I will pause from time to time to answer questions. So in the recent years, the last 10 years, there was a rise in the attacks that are focusing on hardware and firmware. And there is a lot of research that is being published in security conferences. There were also a few leaks that disclosed some of the firmware implants, backdoors, security tools that became actively used by the threat actors. And this is on one hand. On the other hand, the maturity of security posture programs in organizations have addressed mostly the software and operating systems, but there was not enough visibility into the status of firmware. And for this reason, there are many organizations that do not have adequate tools to track the security posture of firmware. And so this is the area that we are focusing on with this feature. So to clarify what we mean by hardware and firmware, we are focusing on servers and endpoints, so laptops and desktops, and the hardware components and firmware that is present on the baseboards, either on the baseboard or external components like network cards that can be plugged in. And so you can think of basically any component like Ethernet adapter, TPM, and the associated firmware like BIOS, DPM, firmware, also remote management firmware like Intel Management Engine or components like baseboard management cards with their firmware. And also device drivers associated with this hardware components. So we want to, our goal is to inventorize them, provide an inventory with all the details and vulnerability assessment. The reason attackers are interested in this type of targets, there are a few. So first of all, firmware runs with very high privileges, higher than the operating system, which allows attackers, if they succeed to compromise firmware, they can bypass operating system security mechanisms and also tools or security products like endpoint protection products. They can achieve persistence, for example, if they compromise firmware of device of hard drives or BMC modules, and they can achieve stealth communication channels because some of these hardware components are directly connected to external ports without any ability to control, to intercept this communication. And also there is a potential for permanently damaging devices, which could be used by ransomware attackers to damage infrastructure. So this slide shows different types of firmware, their purpose in the system, and the outcomes that attackers can achieve if they compromise this type of firmware. And there are some, the last column is details specific attacks or tools that were published in the last few years that used these types of attacks. So you can review that. So in addition to that, there is another challenge, the challenge of hardware vendors and the way they are responding to vulnerabilities. So the typical situation is that there is at the end some system vendor like Lenovo, Dell, or HP that integrates a system using different components and firmware from other vendors. And for example, they are using processors from Intel or AMD, and they can use BIOS from some independent BIOS vendor like Insight, and the same thing goes for any other component. So if there is a bug or vulnerability in one of these components, it is first researched and published by the vendor of this component, and then the actual fix is supposed to be provided by the system vendor. And it is very hard to map all the affected system vendors. So if there is, let's say, bug in BIOS of Insight, they will not disclose all the affected vendors. And end users should rely on the system vendor to report the vulnerability. At the moment, there are only 4 such vendors: Lenovo, Dell, HP, and HPE, that are regularly reporting the advisories. They're addressing all the vulnerabilities. Other vendors do not do that. or they are doing it in a very unorderly fashion. And even tracking this advisories is also very challenging. So here is an example of a couple of advisories. What you will see is the list of all the models of that vendor. It's like a matrix that says which model is vulnerable to which CVE. In some cases, they will publish a fix right away. In many cases, they don't publish a fix right away, and then there may be a target availability date published. So, and these pages are updated on a daily basis. Eventually, over let's say a month or two, all the models will be patched. So it is very hard for a security administrator in the enterprise to track this information and to find all the relevant fixes and to understand what is the current status of the devices in the organization. So this we are also addressing this problem. We are parsing these advisories on a daily basis, organizing data, and surfacing this information in the way that MDVM customers are used to. Okay, so what we are currently, the functionality that we are currently exposing in the public preview is inventory for system model, CPU, and BIOS, which is supported on all platforms that MD is supported on. So you will see some screenshots shortly. What you'll get is all the system models in your organization, all the CPU models and BIOSes. Then there is a vulnerability assessment for CPU and BIOS vulnerabilities on Lenovo, HP, and Dell at the moment. HPE is going to be added in the next quarter. In addition to that, we are checking the status of the UEFI secure boot configuration, and we report devices that have secure boot disabled. And there is a recommendation to enable secure boot on these devices. In the next quarter, we are going to deliver support for HPE, and we are going to deliver support for we're going to surface security advisories. And I will show how on all the platforms that we support. So I would like to pause at this now to see if there are any questions. Okay, is the firmware analysis based on Refirm recently acquired by MS? No. So what we do is we collect the information, the BIOS information from the device. On one hand, we parse the advisories of the vendors on the other hand, and we correlate this information. So at the moment, in this offering, there is no functionality that Refirm does. Also, I think they are focusing on other type of firmware. When they mention firmware, they are focusing on firmware of embedded devices, of network devices, and we are focusing on, as I described, the hardware components on the baseboard and their firmware. These are different areas.
I think, Michael, we have another question as well. On the vulnerability intelligence topic, is there any plan to provide the ability to clients on identifying and patching a third-party application in Azure environment?
I'm not I mean, I don't know the answer to this, and I think it is not related to firmware.
Okay, perhaps for
I can
Thomas.
forward this.
I think this was a
question to
question.
some.
Yeah, I think this was a question more for the first part of the presentation from Thomas, but I don't think it's part of the TVM application block either. So we are not familiar with the plans in that respect either. But please feel free to contact with us, and we'll be happy to find out more.
Perfect. Thanks so much.
Okay, so there is one more question about Microsoft Surface support. So it is not available at the moment. It is in the backlog, in the roadmap. Okay, so this is the information on how to join the public preview, and I will go through some screenshots. So in the inventories, we now have another tab, new tab, hardware and firmware, and there is a separate tab for systems, processors, and BIOS. So for systems, you get all the models, system models that you have in your organization with model family, vendor weaknesses. These weaknesses are related to firmware and to CPU and exposed devices. And in the side panel, same information in more detail. And these are these are the devices where of this model, installed devices. Then processors similarly, processor name, family, vendor weaknesses, exposed devices. Okay, and the installed devices of that. And sorry, and BIOS. For BIOS, we have BIOS name and vendor weaknesses. So similar information. And you can also click on go to related security recommendations. This will navigate to the recommendation page with a filter, with the relevant filter. So it will show recommendations for this particular model. Okay. So firmware page. So if you click here, open firmware page. So this will be a firmware page for the selected BIOS. So it's similar to the software page, but it has some information that is related only to firmware. So you get the security recommendations that are related to firmware of this model. Then you get CVEs, and in the CVE information you will have, if the CVE is related to firmware, then there will be all the firmware names. Then there is version distribution, which shows all the versions in your organization related to this firmware and the devices where these versions were found. Okay, then there's missing security updates. So these are security updates published by vendors that are relevant for this firmware. Okay, these are the advisories that I mentioned in the past. And also the associated devices and the CVEs that are published in these advisories. Then there is a timeline, so you can also review the timeline with events related to firmware. Okay, the weaknesses page. So largely the remain the same, but there is some additional information that is related to firmware. So this security update status was added because it is important for firmware. So as I explained before, in the advisory you can get models that have a fix, models that have a fix scheduled in the future, models that don't have a fix, and theoretically there is also cases, but very rare, where the vendor says that they are not going to fix this vulnerability. And so we reflect this graph. And then you see the related software. In this case, it's firmware and all other firmwares. Okay, and you can see in the related software tab, there will be actually different names of firmware, in this case BIOS, and the status. The status can be available, not available. In this case, the schedule is selected, and you can see the date that was published. Okay, here is, and also this example shows that this is CV that is not patched at the moment. There's no fix for that. It is scheduled in the future. So the vulnerable versions are all versions. And in this screenshot, it's a different example where the fix is available. And you can see that this is the version that addresses this CVE, and all versions prior to this version are vulnerable. Okay, so you can know what is the recommended version. Okay. Okay, there is a question: is firmware assessment feature part of MDP2 or add-on? It is part of an add-on. Recommendation. So you get in the recommendation screen, you have recommendations per model. Okay, there is a filter that allows you to focus on recommendations for firmware. And yeah, so for each model, there is a separate recommendation. Otherwise, the recommendation looks the same as software recommendation. In the device page, the same information, but in more details is also included. So here you get system model information in more detail, model type, and a bit more information about the processor and BIOS, and also there is evidence on how MDVM detected this BIOS version, which and when it was done last time. Okay, then in the device page you have this in the discovered vulnerabilities. BIOS vulnerabilities are included. In the missing security updates are all the security updates that are related to firmware. In the same place you will have KBs, Windows KBs, if this is relevant. And we show the ID, and this is the link to the advisory of the vendor, in this case Dell, and all the related CVEs. Okay, then secure boot. So we have a recommendation to enable secure boot on the devices where it is not enabled. So you get, there are in this case 614 devices, out of which 92 do not have secure boot mode enabled. If you go to exposed devices, you will see those devices, and you can export, if you want, the list of these devices, or follow the standard remediation flow. So far, this was the functionality that is available today. Then what I'm showing now is the functionality that will be ready for GA, but it will also be available for the design partners to review very soon, in a week or two. So this is security advisories functionality that addresses this problem of tracking multiple devices with multiple versions that I described at the beginning of the presentation. So under weaknesses, we have split. There is an additional tab. So until now, there were only CVEs. Now there is additional tab called Security Advisories that shows advisors from Lenovo, HP, and Dell. And for each advisory, you get the severity. This one is published by the vendor, a number of CVEs, a link to the advisory itself, the vendor, and other information, the number of exposed devices. You can either, by default, you see devices that affect your organization the same way as with CVEs, but you can also see all advisories. And you can filter them by severity and age. So an advisory looks like this. So there is a description text from the vendor. Then there is a status of the fix by devices. So the number of devices with different fix status. OS platform distribution. Then there is a list of exposed devices, CVEs, and the firmware, which again has this version, the version that contains the fix. So we think that this will be a more efficient way of tracking firmware vulnerabilities. So you would like to go by these advisories and not by single CVE, because one advisory typically addresses many CVEs. It can be up to 40 or 50 CVEs sometimes. Yeah, I think I'm finished. So if there are any questions, I can answer.
Yeah, I don't think we have any new questions, Michael. So thank you so much for the time. If anyone has any additional ones, you can either still post it now in here, or I just sent a link as well for additional questions that may come up afterwards. As a reminder, please definitely join our Microsoft 365 Defender community. Link is also in the chat as well. And thank you so much, Thomas and Michael, for today's webinar. Thank you especially to the team who helped to answer questions along the way. And most of all, thank you all for being a part of our community and for joining us on this webinar. We definitely hope to see you next time, and goodbye.
Thank you.